Boys, we have a lot of lore to unravel with this one. Let's get right into it and hope I don't pass out from exhaustion. I'm going to get the smaller and more insignificant details right out of the way, as I don't have much to say about them. So, in the Shadowlands, the sites of grace are replaced by Miquella's wounds, which serve instead as resting places. This indicates that no traces of grace exist there due to Marika's curse, which we will discuss later. At 2:16, the trailer shows Saint Trina falling into darkness, reminiscent of the Abyss from Dark Souls. This scene likely illustrates how Miquella reached the Shadowlands through the use of sleep. This same method appears to be how the followers of Miquella and possibly Saint Trina later followed Miquella into the Shadowlands. A follower group we see at the end of the trailer. Between 2:51 and 3 minutes, the music in this scene is probably Saint Trina singing, as it is a distinct humming we haven't heard before. And it definitely isn't from the Elden Beast introduction OST. Have a listen to both versions. Additionally, the giant walking fire creatures we saw in the previous trailer and are inspired by Berserk are affiliated with Messmer as seen in this epic shot here. At 1:14, I first thought a sword similar to the Sacred Relic Sword or Godslayer Greatsword appears here. But then I was reminded of the concept art for the Godskin Apostle with a coiled sword, which looks more similar to it here than the other swords. So I guess this woman is connected to the Godskins. I believe this woman is actually Melina. This theory is based on the fact that there's no explicit mention that Melina burned inside the Erdtree, only that she burned and became bodiless without any specific location mentioned. Therefore, the trailer might be showing this event here, as the cloak and hood bear some resemblance to Melina's attire. This raises the possibility that Melina is not the Glowmite Queen, but rather a sister or close servant to her. In fact, I believe we actually see the Glowmite Queen throughout both this story trailer and the previous gameplay trailer. With these minor details out of the way, let's begin our in-depth lore discussion of the story trailer's events and start with the first part of the trailer. To start it off, I quote the following tweet by the official Elden Ring Twitter account. "The shadow of the story can now be told. For it is indeed a shadow we learn about in this trailer. A shadow harboring a grave secret and dark deed Marika committed in the past. This act is so horrendous that it overshadows all of her other deeds known to us, including the persecution of the Faral Shines and the discrimination against anything related to the era of the Crucible." The trailer opens with the following dialogue.
Miquella the Kind spoke of the beginning. The seduction and the betrayal. An affair from which gold arose. And so too was Shadow born.
First up, the act of seduction is defined as the action of seducing someone. When I first thought about the sentence, an affair from which gold arose, I first thought about something more diplomatic, as my thoughts first wandered towards the rise of the Golden Order and her ascension to godhood. However, after mulling it over and rewatching the first scenes, I've come to another conclusion. Under the definition and use of the term seduction, I'm convinced that whatever dark deed Marika committed in the past, it was done to someone she was romantically involved with. A relationship that ended in betrayal, as revealed by the line "and then betrayal," which resulted in an extremely bloody conclusion we see in the trailer's first part. Blood is everywhere here. Blood is on Marika's hands, on the ground and stairs she walks on, with even flesh parts, and the entire area she stands in is covered in endless amounts of corpses and blood. So right from the get-go, From Software again shows us the theme of death with this trailer, something I have speculated about in my previous trailer analysis for the DLC. And here we have another scene radiating death. As such, I'm convinced that if the lands between are meant to represent life, then the Shadowlands are its antithesis, and death is a major part of this realm. We will talk more about that later. So, Marika betrayed someone she was close to and essentially killed her. Who is this person? That person she was somehow romantically involved with was very likely another woman. At 18 seconds, I noticed something that looked like breasts in the upper part of the frame. This becomes clearer as the scene progresses, revealing that the white, blood-stained robe doesn't change shape around this area where Marika pulls out her hand. What she retrieves from this body are golden strands. Initially, I thought they might be hair, but after seeing how Marika raises them later on, it's clear they are something far more significant. These strands are of such importance that Marika was willing to seduce and violently kill this woman to obtain them for herself. There's another key visual that confirms the person Marika betrayed is a woman, and it also hints at her identity. If you look closely, after Marika retrieves the golden strands, a belly with a peculiar shape enters the frame, a form which looks very pregnant to me. While it isn't clearly visible, and I'm no expert on pregnancy, I compared the shape of this belly with an image I found online. And not only does the shape look similar, but when considering the position of her breasts, it suggests that the woman was in her late first or early second trimester at the time of her death. In fact, this detail provides the clue to where we've seen this woman before. In the gameplay reveal trailer at 59 seconds, she appears in a portrait wearing a robe similar in design. The most definite proof is her gesture of holding her belly, a clear indicator of pregnancy, as women often exhibit this specific behavior when they learn they are expecting a child. Meaning that she must have been pregnant for quite some time, judging by the time this portrait was painted and the shape of her belly. If this woman is indeed the one Marika allegedly seduced and betrayed, we can further assume that Marika killed her lover, who was pregnant with either their child or someone else's, to obtain these golden strands. I constantly debated whether the child is hers or someone else's. The crucial piece to answering this question lies in when exactly she had her Radagon side. I think I noticed in the trailer that she isn't wearing a top, suggesting she recently transformed from her Radagon side back to herself. Although this isn't definitely confirmable, as it is hard to make out clearly. But still, if she doesn't wear a top here because she transformed into Radagon recently, then this transformation might have occurred right after killing this woman and taking the golden strands. Yet, I'm not sure whether the transformation actually happened due to this scene's ambiguity. And consequently, we can't confirm if she had her Radagon side at that point. Although it's possible for her Radagon side to conceive a child with this woman, it doesn't align with the current timeline of events. We know that Marika first set foot in the Shadowlands and became a god there with the creation of the Erdtree. At this point, it would have been impossible for her to have a Radagon side, as the first mention of Radagon occurs after the war with the Fire Giants. We cannot determine how this dual nature actually works or the means by which one obtains it. So far, we have always believed that Marika's other half could only be possible to obtain through her status as a god and, by extension, the use of the Elden Ring. It remains unclear as such whether Marika had her Radagon side before becoming a god or not. Furthermore, we also lack other precise information about when exactly Messmer was born, as his red hair indicates that he is indeed a descendant of Marika and Radagon. If Messmer was born before Marika became a god, this would prove that she already had her Radagon side at a time, making the baby of the woman likely hers. However, we lack this crucial piece of information to reach a definite conclusion. In the same way as we do not know if Marika and Radagon were always two beings in the same body, or at some point melted together and were two separate entities in the past. However, I lean toward the idea that Marika had her Radagon side before becoming a god. I base this on my understanding of the timeline that she sent Messmer to Purge the Shadowlands immediately after her act of betrayal, not waiting several years for an army to form that would hold her accountable. That is how I understand the timeline presented to us in the story trailer. Regardless, these golden strands are of such significant importance that Marika was willing to commit the extreme act of seducing and ultimately killing a pregnant woman. This isn't just a betrayal in my opinion, it's a betrayal of the highest degree possible. But to what end would she commit this act? The most plausible explanation is that this scene represents Marika's creation of the Erdtree and ascension to godhood. If we recall, it is through this DLC that we will learn how Marika created the Erdtree and became a god. As such, this scene could be interpreted as the moment she achieves both of these monumental goals. While it remains unclear how these golden strands could lead to the creation of the Erdtree or contribute to Marika's ascension to godhood, there are intriguing parallels within this part of the trailer and the game's lore that suggest a deeper connection. In Miquella's lore, we learned that he used his own blood to create and nourish the Halic tree. Similarly, it is possible that the blood Marika spilled in this area was used to water the Erdtree, allowing it to grow into the giant tree we see now. And the golden strands could be the essential component that gives the Erdtree its radiant shine. Every giant tree we've seen that resembles the Erdtree lacks its unique glowing properties. The presence of these golden strands could explain what makes the Erdtree special, not just in appearance, but in essence, setting it apart from all the other giant trees. If this is true, then in a strange way, the Erdtree could be considered the love child born from Marika's affair with this woman. Given our limited understanding of the exact process by which the Erdtree was created, this theory offers a potential explanation for these mysterious scenes in the trailer's first part. But there's another theory I have as to what allowed the Erdtree to grow to its enormous size. Another process that didn't involve blood, but more a parasitic approach I will explain later. Before wrapping up this part of the trailer, there's one more theory I have in mind. I was working on a theory video about Miquella just before we received the story trailer, and I believe my theory is somewhat echoed within the DLC story trailer. While working on this video prior, I developed another idea concerning the identity of the woman in the trailer. What if this woman is the Glowmite Queen? We know that Marika and the Glowmite Queen clashed when both were Empyreans vying for the position of God Vessel for the Elden Ring. However, the reason for the conflict was never revealed. What if this seduction and betrayal were the catalyst for the Glowmite Queen's clash with Marika and her subsequent hunt for Marika's Golden Order and kin? The only hint supporting my theories so far is the woman's white robe. Since white is the primary color of the Glowmite Queen's faction, it is plausible that this woman could indeed be the Queen. Additionally, upon re-examining the portrayal of this woman with this context in mind, it might actually depict the Glowmite Queen, because the style and the design of her attire does somewhat resemble the decorations found on the Godskin's attire. While she may not have died in this scene, but later at the hands of Malekith, as indicated by her weapon, the Godslayer's greatsword, her evident connection to death is further echoed in the area depicted in the first part of the trailer. This is why I'm convinced that she is, in fact, the Glowmite Queen. For I get the distinct feeling of seeing the realm of death in this shot. It also seems very much inspired by Berserk's Eclipse dimension, but instead of giant faces, we see actual bodies with blood, flesh, and corpses everywhere. If this scene indeed depicts the moment Marika ascended to godhood, it would parallel how Griffith became a member of the Godhand by sacrificing his soldiers. With the woman seemingly dead here, she could very well be the final sacrifice Marika required to achieve her divinity status. Therefore, the dialogue, the seduction, and the betrayal could be interpreted in a ritualistic manner similar to Berserk. Given the dark nature of this entire scene, it suggests a deeper, more sinister result behind Marika's actions. Another interesting aspect of this scene is the stark difference between the corpses in the background and those in the foreground. The background heaps still appear to have the skin, while the foreground corpses seem to lack it. This detail further supports a connection to the Glowmite Queen and her apostles, who are known for their practice of skinning people, which is yet another reason why I believe the woman at the beginning is the Glowmite Queen. What's also interesting is how this passageway of bodies transitions from a nightmare into the light of life. Marika stands in this passageway, with gold and light illuminating the sky and scenery ahead of her, while behind her lies death and darkness, casting a shadow over the landscape with gloomy clouds in the sky. This dark contrast between life and death once again aligns with the involvement of the Glowmite Queen, because it appears here as though Marika traveled into the realm of death to retrieve the boom she needed to usher in her age of the Golden Order. At the cost of committing dark deeds, much like Griffith did during the Eclipse, this scene could mark the end of the Empyrean selection process. Marika emerges as the victor because she obtained these golden strands from the Glowmite Queen. And maybe after this betrayal, the Queen officially adopted the name Glowmite Queen and abandoned her Dusk-Eye part after this betrayal. As it makes me wonder why the Queen is referred to as Dusk-Eyed in her sword, but in every other item description as Gloam-Eyed. For this change in name might be symbolic of her path of hunting down Marika's order with her apostles. These are the vibes I get from this first part of the trailer. And I'll better leave it at that with my speculations, for we could talk endlessly about it. On a side note, I'm really curious to know what Miyazaki smoked to come up with these crazy ideas. This entire trailer is absolutely wild, man. Especially the following part with Messmer. Let's turn our attention now to what happened after this scene and the dialogue we hear.
What followed was a war unseen. One that could never be put to song. A purge without grace or honor. The tyranny of Messmer's flame.
After Marika's act of betrayal, Messmer invaded and massacred the Shadowlands. I would argue that, at this point, the Shadowlands were already inaccessible to most inhabitants of the Lands Between. This war is described as one unseen, one that could never be put to song because no outsider ever learned of these events. The brutality of the invasion is evident from the numerous impalements and flames, which certainly explain Messmer's title as the Impaler. However, the Purge didn't end then and there. Messmer stayed in the Shadowlands indefinitely, his rule serving to suppress any potential resistance from the Shadowlands against the Golden Order. This period is referred to as Tyranny of Messmer's Flame, with tyranny being defined as cruel and oppressive government or rule. In the trailer, we might see Messmer's other eye open. After editing the image, it appears that his sclera is white and his iris might be red. This suggests that when Messmer gets serious, he opens both eyes to access his full power, which would explain why the entire city is completely engulfed in fire. Also, this is perhaps a parallel to Melena's frenzied flame ending, in which she too opens her closed left eye and displays some form of power over destined death. So, in Messmer's second phase, we will see his other eye open and witness his full power? I'm down for it. Anyway, the key takeaway of this part of the trailer is that we see here not just a Purge, but also a conquest of the Shadowlands, spearheaded by Messmer on orders from Marika. The evidence that Marika ordered Messmer to attack these lands is clearly depicted here in the trailer. At the 145 mark, Marika's rune shape is seen near the Erdtree. This raises question about why it is there and what its purpose might be. Additionally, there are these black particles moving from the castle towards the Erdtree, seemingly gathering around the tree. I believe to know exactly what we're seeing here. This scene, along with previous images of the Erdtree, suggests that Marika put a curse on this tree. In the gameplay trailer, the Erdtree is entirely black except for the golden sap, with no trace of Marika's rune. However, in the story trailer, many spots remain tree brown, supporting the idea that Marika's rune plays a significant role in turning the tree black. And this wouldn't be the first instance of Marika cursing something, as we've seen with the Fire Giant. Furthermore, something most have likely missed in this shot is that the Erdtree is visible in the background. It can be easily identified by its distinct trunk shape and golden branches here. This observation leads me to another theory about the origin of the Erdtree. What if the golden sap, Marika's rune and the tree being carved in black are all signs that the Erdtree is being drained of its energy to give life to the Erdtree in the Lands Between? This idea of it actively being drained is supported by later scenes in the story trailer at the 228 and 237 marks, where Marika's rune is no longer there, in the present day with Miquella's followers in the frame. And even the prior gameplay trailer doesn't show her rune in any frame. This implies that Marika's rune might have been the ritual sign for cursing and actively draining the tree. Furthermore, the way the Erdtree is presented here is reminiscent of an astral projection, similar to the trees in the mountaintops of the Giants. Could it be that the Erdtree's power is manifesting the Erdtree in the Lands Between? With all of this in mind, we can infer the nature of this curse. Marika's rune represents life, while the Shadowlands are steeped in imagery evoking death. This suggests that Marika may have placed a life-stealing curse on the dead, further suppressing any resistance from these lands towards the Golden Order. In turn, she used the stolen energy to grow the Erdtree. Think about a lifesteal mechanic from Dark Souls, employed by the Dark Waves to steal souls and humanity from other undead. I believe From Software uses a similar story element here, which in turn also raises the question of why it is that Marika placed a curse on this tree in the first place. It's worth noting that I haven't seen much discussion about the Erdtree anywhere online, even though it is prominently featured in every marketing material for the DLC and as such must play a huge part in the DLC's lore. But no one, myself included, has ever asked a question or made a compelling theory as to what the purpose of this tree in the Shadowlands is. For Marika to curse it and seemingly steal its energy for the Erdtree's growth, the Erdtree must be vital to the Shadowlands somehow. It is as such very likely that this tree is of the same importance as the Erdtree is within the Lands Between. And further proof for the tree being cursed by Marika have we already seen in the gameplay trailer. Specifically this scene here with Miquella. Miquella is seen here turning the tree's branches white. Hence, this indicates that Miquella is undoing Marika's curse and purifying the tree. For there's also no golden sap anywhere, indicating that it is being cleansed of anything, which in turn raises several more questions. What are the effects of this curse and why does Miquella want to remove it? Furthermore, how does Miquella even know about the Erdtree's cursed state? And how did Miquella gain all this knowledge about the history of the Shadowlands? If we recall the first lines of dialogue from the trailer, it clearly states, Miquella the Kind spoke of the beginning. This implies that Miquella has a deep understanding of the events that transpired in these lands. As the line "spoke of the beginning" indicates that he knows about all of these past events in great detail. The way Miquella told his followers all of this in a tale format further suggests as if he was there and witnessed all of it with his own eyes. Remember, Messmer's war against the Shadowlands is being referred to as unseen. As such, only people that were there in that time could know about how Marika betrayed that woman, her obtaining the golden strands, how she sent Messmer to Purge the Shadowlands, and her cursing its giant tree. So how does Miquella know about these events? We know that he was born long after all of this happened, yet he can speak of them as if he lived through those times. Furthermore, this implication is for me also the first time we can actually grasp a concrete motivation for Miquella to go to the Shadowlands. For this trailer, and all the information we now have, hints at a significant connection Miquella has to the Shadowlands, which in turn suggests that his motivations for going there are to remove Marika's curse from the tree and undo her injustices against these lands. Under these circumstances, this might also explain why Miquella created the Erdtree in the first place. The Erdtree is in essence a failed version of the Erdtree Miquella created with his own blood. A tree that does look extremely similar to the Shadow Tree. It's a comparison I and many others did when the first concept art for the DLC was released. So what if his goals behind creating the Erdtree has been from the very beginning to study the subject of creating giant powerful trees in its entirety to obtain the necessary knowledge to cure the Shadow Tree in the Shadowlands? And this too brings us to the question of how Miquella learned all of this in the first place. While it is possible that he obtained this knowledge by using his alter ego of Saint Trina, I don't think this is the actual case. The scene in the trailer of Saint Trina sinking into an abyss symbolizes, I believe, how Miquella reached the Shadowlands via the domain of sleep. Hence, I would rule out that Saint Trina was the way in which he learned about the history of the Shadowlands, as I believe Saint Trina was to him only a means to reach these lands. To me, all of his knowledge about these events only makes sense for him to have if Miquella witnessed all of this firsthand, because there's no other way for Miquella to learn all of this. Marika ensured that no one could learn of these events by essentially banning entrance to the Shadowlands and leaving Messmer behind to make sure nothing there could pose a threat to her. A level of security detail that is indeed quite formidable. To give away my idea for the upcoming and last theory I have about Miquella, I believe that next to Saint Trina, he has one other persona within him. A persona that actually lived through the times of when all of these events from the story trailer happened in the past. So subscribe and stay tuned for that video in the upcoming days. But yeah, those were all of the interesting lore pieces we can get from the DLC story trailer. I honestly think that this DLC will be as big as when Elden Ring launched 2 years ago. And I really hope this will become, again, Game of the Year, because so far no other announced game can even get close in quality to Shadow of the Erdtree, which is just an expansion. Again, subscribe to my channel, because the time leading up to DLC's drop will be packed with interesting lore videos for you to enjoy. Have a great day and see you in the next one.